Hi, my name is Nathaniel Jones, and I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar, Diodes and the Death of Daylighting as an ECM by Paul Hutton and Sukhpreet Singh. This webinar is hosted by the IBPSA-USA Research Committee with the goal to share new ideas from research to the building of simulation community. If you have questions during this webinar, please type them in the chat window. At the end of the 45-minute presentation, I will unmute you for a discussion with Paul and Sukhpreet. Now, I'd like to introduce Paul Hutton and Sukhpreet Singh. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Nathan. So Paul, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I am Paul Hutton. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer at Cunningham Group Architecture. I work primarily out of the Denver office, and I've been working on daylighting buildings of all types since approximately 1980. I've taught daylighting at the University of Colorado Graduate School of Architecture for many years, and eager to share with you our thinking about how this field is very rapidly evolving. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm Sukhpreet Singh. I'm Director of Energy Analytics at Cunningham Group. I work very closely with Paul Hutton on all of our projects across market groups. My whole role is more focused on simulations, and whether it's energy simulation, daylight simulations, or airflow, whole intent is to be able to bring the performance aspect to our designs. And a lot of our work primarily happens on our own projects. And we, irrespective of whether it's going for any rating system or not, we're focused on creating those daylight models on almost all of our projects, as well as energy models, so that we can make an informed decision on our projects. And with that, we would also request, by the time people are coming in, to just answer this question in the chat back to the presenters. What do you expect to get out of this event, training or meeting? And when Nathan tells me to move forward, we will move forward. Okay.
Got a few responses rolling in right now.
Perfect. I don't see them.
All right, I think they're perhaps just coming to me. People asking for training and for confirmation that daylighting is declining as an ECM.
Okay.
And because they met you, Sukhpreet.
Oh, thank you. So while that keeps coming in, we just want to quickly tell everyone that if you will get AIA credit on this, so please email info@aiaeb.org to receive credit for this course. And this is the first poll question that we have for you, while we still have everybody coming up. Let's see, launch the poll. Nathan, tell me if you see that poll on your end.
I do.
Okay, perfect. So I see a lot of never. I see business on top, peaches on bottom. That's good. I'm curious, who was this person who said, I literally took them off a minute ago. Thanks for being so transparent. 100% yes. Good. We'll end this poll and we will get into it. It's a lot more professionals. I can share results, I guess. A lot of them never, so I guess, okay. But I like the people who are business on top, peaches on bottom. I've done that in the past. Good. Let's keep this moving. I hope we're 5 minutes in and we've given enough time, right, Nathan? Okay. Sounds like a plan. So I'll let Paul take it from here. Paul, you should also have controls.
Yep, let's see if I can advance. Right, okay, so I want to start with this slide. So I've been an architect, as I mentioned, or maybe not, for approximately 40 years. And for almost the entirety of my career, I have cherished the notion that daylighting is a fundamental component of what we can and should be doing. And most of the buildings I've worked on have had aspects similar to what you're seeing on the screen, where we have combined windows, clerestories, skylights, monitors, tubular daylighting devices. We've explored the wide range of options available to bring daylight into the cores of our buildings and at the perimeter of our buildings. We've used sunshades, light shells, and all those things. And so for me, it was a personal evolution to gradually realize that we had reached an era where a lot of that architectural adventurism no longer was serving the intended purpose. And so Sucreet and I, 4 years ago, actually as part of a Greenville presentation, decided to undertake a more in-depth analysis to really understand what was happening to daylighting. Is it really still an energy conserving measure? Yes or no? Because we felt we needed to understand that better in order to inform our own design work moving forward and to decide whether this kind of thing that you're seeing, a building, by the way, from 25 years ago, if that's still relevant today. So here's how we used to look at it. And this, by the way, is an interior of a library in that nice little private school. We used to say this to ourselves as designers: electric light uses electricity. That's pretty obvious. Electricity is expensive and runs the meter. Also obvious. Daylight is free and non-polluting. Electric light is hotter than daylight. That's a key component. And electric light leads to more air conditioning than daylight. And therefore, the conclusion was, if we did good daylighting with controls, controlled glare and excessive heat gain, that we actually could design buildings that were beautiful to be in and resulted in lower energy use. In fact, our typical attitude was we could save or hope to save somewhere around at least 10% of the total energy use of a typical building through careful daylighting. And we believe that we had pretty good data to demonstrate that. And so that is sort of when I began my career, the attitude that I had, that I shared in training and teaching across the country. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. So here is a pie chart of energy use from not today, but from a high performance building many years ago, closer to when I was earlier in my career. And we can see back then that lighting was a very significant piece of energy use in most buildings. It was almost always more than 20%, sometimes as high as 25% or higher actually went into lighting. And another fairly significant share went into cooling. So of course, if you could cut the lighting drastically through daylighting design and daylight harvesting, and you had corresponding results resulting in savings on the cooling side, it wasn't too hard to imagine how you could get to a 10% energy savings in this kind of a scenario. And in fact, this isn't my building, but one that I remember seeing a conference presentation on at the International Daylighting Conference in 1983. And I love this section because it shows the extremes to which architects began to go in the 80s and into the 90s to really drive daylighting deep into building cores. So on the left-hand side, you have a north side building light shelf that's 12 feet deep. On the south side, you had a light shelf that's 16 or 17 feet deep and has a very complex geometry to it. You can see how much complexity is being put into the building shell in order to drive daylighting design. And a lot of architects have done similar explorations on their buildings. And so this is what we're wanting to ask: does this really make sense anymore? And embedded in our literature has been a lot of information about daylighting saving energy. This is just a small sampling of the thousands of articles that you could still Google and find about daylighting and energy savings in buildings. And I'm sure many of you on the call, if not all of you on the call, have seen and come up upon these kind of things. I've been involved in writing some of these kind of things. So I certainly understand the degree to which this has been ingrained in architecture and building design beliefs, that daylighting is a fundamental strategy, and it had been a fundamental strategy. In fact, if we even look at the AI Top 10 awards, really the cream of the cream in terms of sustainability design in the United States, what we find is that the designers in their own submittals are still using language that suggests a belief that daylighting is an energy conserving measure. It's still thoroughly embedded and has not yet been revised or updated the way we think it could. So we wanted to mention to you that this is a slightly technical presentation. Sucreet's part of it will get fairly technical, So just wanted to mention that there are 4 key terms that we're going to use throughout this presentation. They are lighting power density, or LPD, lighting efficacy, measured in lumens per watt, site energy use intensity, or EUI, and spatial daylight autonomy, SDA. And to us, these are fundamental terms that you need to understand to be able to engage in a conversation around energy and daylighting design. If you're not completely familiar with these terms, we suggest you might want to do a little bit of background research. We're not going to take the time to go into in-depth definitions. Just wanted to make sure that you all knew that we're going to be using these terms pretty freely and liberally as we go through the rest of this presentation. So I'm going to take you on a little history tour. So this was the first building that I was project architect and project designer on so many years ago, now 35. And because I have still the documents on all that, I was able to go back and recalculate lighting power density for this building that was designed to be an energy conserving building. And if you go back in that time, the most efficient we could design lighting with the fluorescent technology of the day was just about 2 watts per square foot. And in fact, most buildings in that time would have used significantly more than 2 watts a square foot, but 2 was about the bare minimum that we could do high quality lighting with. That's a lot of watts. So let's kind of move forward in time. So I'm going to jump about, 13 years later, another building, you saw this building earlier. Fluorescent technology, as most of us know, did progress steadily through the years. Not too rapidly, but progress. So in those 13 years, we went from needing 2 watts a square foot to only needing 1.4 watts. What happened? The fixture designs got better, and the sources themselves started to offer higher, the lamps themselves started to offer higher efficacy. So we were able to move closer to 1 watt per square foot. And if we scroll forward just a little bit more, we'll find, oops, I skipped 1 here. Make sure I get that. Let's see, okay, make sure I get it, right. Okay, I guess that's what I'm moving to. So 10 years after that, we saw, my gosh, we went all the way from 1.4 watts to 1.2 watts. Again, just steady incremental progress in the fixture and lamp technology. And one more step. This is one of the last high energy efficiency daylighted building designs that we did, where lighting power density with fluorescent lighting was really key. And we got it all the way down to 1.1 watt a square foot. And that was about the apex of the fluorescent realm of technology. After that, we, of course, began these transition very rapidly to, get rid of that irritating little window. We began the transition to LED lighting, and that's what this presentation really starts to focus on. So if we look now at our first 100% LED school building in 2014, of course, there was a period of years where we kind of had a transition of combining LED for some things and fluorescent for others. But by 2014, we were 100% LED, and we saw immediately lighting power density started to drop really significantly. Now we're well under 1 watt a square foot and have great light quality at the same time. And let's see if I can get the next slide. And then just a few years after that, in 2016, we were designing this building where we had the entire building at 0.6, and we had spaces, in particular classrooms, well under 0.5. Today, our standard is 0.4 for entire buildings. So making the point that we have gone from needing 2+ watts a square foot all the way down to less than half a watt a square foot, a 4 or 5-fold decrease in lighting power density in our buildings. And of course, that's going to have an impact on how energy is used in our buildings. And we're starting to see that. So we're going to share that with you. So just a quick little bit about LED history. I find this fascinating. If we look at what has happened in the development of LED, most of us don't realize the foundations of LED technology go back more than a century to early experiments from 1907. And of course, something that I remember well, the first commercially available application for LED was in those wonderful HP 35 calculators. I had one of those that got me through college. Maybe some of you on the call remember seeing those, or perhaps if you are similar age to myself and even had one of those calculators. But when those things came out, it never occurred to any of us, I don't think, that would become from this little teeny source of light to a source of general illumination that it has become today. So pretty incredible that rapid change. And one of the things we like to talk about with lighting design is efficacy. And efficacy is pretty simple. It's how many lumens are output for each watt that goes into the lamp itself. And here we see the historical development of all the other typical electric lighting sources that we have over time, moving from incandescent to halogen fluorescent, metal halide, even compact fluorescent. And they were all in a fairly narrow range of efficacy from, well, starting at around 10 with incandescent and just starting to touch 100 lumens per watt at the very best of some of our older light sources. But once we get to LED, we see that LED, in a blink of an eye in relative terms, went from not being as efficient as the current incandescent bulbs to nearly doubling the most efficient light source we have anywhere else. In fact, if we look at the theoretical limit, and who knows if that's accurate, but some people say this is a theoretical limit, it might get as high as 268 lumens per watt. That's an incredible level of efficiency. And the really important point to make here is this. If we compare the efficacy of daylight, which we can do, to the efficacy of these typical lighting sources, we find that LED is the first electric light source that has an efficacy greater than daylight. That is to say, for every watt of use, every lumen, of useful light being delivered, it is bringing fewer watts of heat energy with it. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking about electric lighting sources. I'll just show this chart again. You saw this here. Just a reminder where we were a generation ago in terms of a high performance building would have looked something like this. Today, a high performance building would have an energy pie about like this. Somewhere around half the energy use, now under 30 for the EUI. And of that smaller energy pie, an even smaller percentage is now going to lighting. We're routinely having buildings where less than 10% of the total energy is going toward lighting. And remember, that pie has gotten smaller too. So the reality is we're spending about a quarter of the amount of energy on lighting that we did a generation ago. And that changes a lot of things. And Sucrit, I think this is where I turn it over to you.
Yep, thanks, Paul. And so once we looked at all that transition and beautifully explained by Paul in terms of the history, we at some point we said, okay, let's try to really dive into and compare and create a correlation between daylighting and energy on our project. So we took a sample office project in climate zone 5B. And what we ended up doing was used it in 4 different cases, one being completely no windows. Second, we had some view windows in it. Third, we had some clerestory windows added to it. Fourth, we said, okay, now it's a good daylit from the side. Let's also add some lighting from the top. And we used like a current code-based, high-performing type assembly in on our project. In fact, beyond code in terms of wall efficiency as well, and created 3 different sites as adiabatic as if they are working on a high, there's a conditioned space around it. So we looked it into zone 5. So my question, and we want to give you a break a little bit here and launch our second poll with this question. Let me see if I can go to my polls and launch it. So we just want to see which out of the 4 options is the most energy efficient based on what we have covered so far before we dive deeper. And that also gives a little bit more idea about where we are heading with this. Okay. 50% of people have voted. We'll stop around 75%. Okay, you never really know what you get out of these polls. So it's interesting. I'm about to cut it off in the next 1 second. We're around 80%. I hope you found it interesting. And let me just share the results. So we had 40% for option number 1, 33 for option number 2, 11 for option 3, and 15 for option 4. So it was pretty much in all the spectrum. We had some people saying different things, right? And let's figure out the answer together with this, because I didn't give you one essential information in it. So let's compare them. let's understand that first with the daylighting perspective. What's happening with these scenarios? And we will be using spatial daylight autonomy, which is an annual based, majority of you I think already know. I'm speaking to the choir here, but for those who don't, we're looking at spatial daylight autonomy, in which we're looking at annual analysis for daylighting from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we're trying to meet 30 foot candles for 50% of the time. If we do hit that criteria, it will be in orange. So as we can, it doesn't take a genius to assume or understand this aspect, that if there's no windows, of course, there's no daylight in it, and everything is zero. You don't have any space which has any good daylight. Moment we add some view windows to it, what happens at that point? We start seeing some areas, now you will start seeing, which has somewhat a good daylight space throughout the year, and we are facing south in this case. And if in case we move more towards clerestory, you see about 42% of the space now is well lit throughout the year in that side. But there is portion of that space which is unlit or not as well lit. So that's when, once we add our skylights, pretty much the whole space is now well lit. So again, this is almost a common sense what I just said, but I wanted to emphasize all of this. More we are adding, the more daylight we are getting, so better design that gets. Now, this is the skeleton of the next few graphs we are about to see. So I want to make sure I hone in what we are trying to look at. So on my x-axis is my energy use intensity. On my y-axis is my daylight autonomy. So just as we all understand, the more the daylight autonomy and the lower the energy use, that's basically a good design, right? So it's worse if I have less autonomy, and if it's more energy, it's worse. That's where my great design really lies. So if I'm not in that quadrant, I don't necessarily have a great design, which would entail a higher amount of daylight and less amount of energy use. Poor design would be in this ballpark, right? If we're trying to compare both of them. So now if you really look at this graph, now let's understand, we are going back to the era of 1985 first. That's when I wasn't even born and Paul had done his first project. But once we go to that era, we're looking at lighting power density of 2.0 watts per square foot. So what happens if we are adding apertures to our envelope? So if we had no windows, we were at a particular EUI. If we add views to it, or clerestories to it, or clerestories with skylight, the energy use comparatively is going higher, because there is a cost to add glazing compared to, say, a typical well-insulated wall assembly, right? So the more glazing we add, the more cost there is. But this is without daylighting controls. But what happens the moment we add daylighting controls? That graph basically switches. So the graph is telling us at that point, or in that era with lighting power density of 2 watts per square foot, saying, well, if you have more watts to displace on your lighting side, so the amount of benefit that you will get on your EUI is a lot more higher than the penalty you might get based on a thermal related aspect to it. So thermal loss, but you're displacing a lot more. So the main takeaway I'm trying to say is, my graph used to be in this particular point with daylighting controls, it used to reverse in terms of, and that's when it used to be in that good daylight design and good energy design area, because that is a great design at that point. But what happens now with all the LEDs and with the good design, if we are able to do it, and we are targeting 0.4 watts per square foot on our projects, or even lower as the time is progressing, if our, the same criteria without daylighting controls, if we are adding these apertures into our project, our energy use is slightly going higher with our good daylight design. But what happens if we add daylighting controls to a design which is very well done from the electric lighting perspective? That graph did not reverse. In other words, the amount of penalty I was getting from the thermal side did not offset the amount of benefit I would have gotten from the electrical side, offsetting electrical demand did not offset the amount of penalty I was getting. So that tells us that the graph is no longer, it's not reversing. So the way it used to be in the good design side doesn't really exist, because that's where my good design is, and I am in this particular quadrant. Now, some of you who are really good at looking at the numbers on the axis would have realized one thing, that my x-axis numbers changed in the two graphs I just showed you. Now, this is both with fluorescent and LEDs, but it's coming out with daylighting controls. We saw the more clerestory and skylights we are adding, we have a lower energy use, right? But now if we look at it from complete LED perspective, now we are looking at adding any of those clerestories and skylights. It's not reversing, but if you really look at overall EUI reduction, that is much more reduced in that particular side, just because we changed the lighting power density. So overall, we are using a lot more less, but that graph trend is not reversing either. It's more of a flat line if we see it from that perspective. So that's a trend in the shift that has happened in the recent past. We took it one step further and we said, let's look at the payback calculations we can on this side. So there is a cost to add a clerestory window. There is a cost to add our skylights. So if we are adding those to our architectural design, we estimated that was about $3.4 a square foot in this area. And we also use the Colorado utility rates to offset what that would be. So once we looked at both of those sides and we said, yes, there is an added cost for clerestory and skylight, how does that play a role with respect to the lighting power density? So if using Colorado rates, if we are looking at how much added cost that we had to bear on the architectural aspect of it compared to the savings we were getting on the operational side, with lighting power density as 2.0, we were in this range, but now that has increased in the number of years. But now then we also knew Colorado is not as aggressive in terms of utility rates as California. So then we explored what happens in California. So the same sort of a payback that we used to see in 7 years for that added cost for clerestory and skylight diminished to over 25 years, even in California, if we are below 0.5 watts per square foot in terms of our lighting power density. And then we also looked at it, if we add solar shade costs to it, that's another expense on it. The moment we add not only clerestory and skylight, but also sunshades, those sunshades takes those to even more number of years once we are at that particular facet. So there is a particular cost if we are really making it from the same judgmental points that we did. So where does it really take us? So are we really saying it doesn't make sense to do daylight at all? Or are we saying we just have to rethink it? So I will hand it back to you, Paul, to take it further.
Thanks, Agreed. Appreciate that incredible in-depth analysis. I remember the first time I saw that, I was just amazed at the clarity with which these graphics and your analysis could illustrate what we were beginning to wonder about intuitively. So thank you again for a lot of time that you put into that. So let's see, I think I have control again. Let me test it right now. So, so if there's not a strong incentive in energy savings and utility cost reduction to doing daylighting in our buildings, why do we still want to do it? And I would argue there are still incredibly important reasons and things that support doing daylighting design. By no means are we advocating not doing daylighting, which is something that came up at our Greenville presentation. We just think we should do daylighting for different reasons, and that might change how we implement it. And of course, those reasons have completely to do with a human need, psychologically and physically, biologically, for daylight. We grew up under daylight. It's the source of light that nurtured us and under which we evolved, and we have a strong need for it. And so again, as there was in the literature, lots of information about how daylighting used to save energy. Today, there's tremendous amounts of information about how daylighting is good for you. especially inside buildings. So I'm just going to scroll through a small sampling of what you could Google if you were to look around. Oh, I went a little too fast there. Sorry. Kind of had to, whoa.
You went all the way to the end, Paul.
What's that?
You went all the way to the end. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me do a current
Not sure
slide.
what happened. Can you get, okay, so I'm just going to try to scroll one. So that's just a couple of the office. Another reason you want the corner office is good for your health because of the daylight, is the implication of that article. Secrete, I might have you advance just to make sure we don't have problems. So yeah, thank you. So these are a couple of other articles. And again, there are thousands of these out there. They talk about things from depression to productivity to better sleep. All of these things are in the literature. But if we start to, and in fact, if we look carefully, what we see is that the literature does support and research supports that daylighting does have these profound benefits. So a lot of the research that's been done is in the realm of office worker productivity. So, for example, call center workers are known to have 6 to 12% faster response time if they have daylighting in views. Office workers are found to have between 10 and 25% better performance on mental function tests. And we know that the physical environment can account for between a third and an eighth of variability in worker performance. How about the next slide, Secrete? And in the realm of healthcare, there's even a greater abundance of research. And some of the things that we now understand are that patients recover more quickly, they need less pain medication, they get out of the hospital faster. All of these things relate directly to having quality daylight and views in our healthcare institutions. And so we've got really solid research that we can point to when we tell our clients we think it's important to still do daylighting design. And so let's dig in a little bit. Why is it that daylighting has such profound benefits? And I think the answer is fairly simple. Let's start with the issue of view. Most things that bring daylight into buildings also provide views back out to nature. And that need for biophilia or connection to natural elements is so profound that we believe that when we provide these kind of views from inside our buildings to allow occupants to connect with nature, it brings with it tremendous benefits. So although we are not designing our buildings anymore to provide daylight to every square foot, we are thinking very systematically about how every occupied space in a building can have a view outside. And we think that is no less important now than it ever was. In fact, we could make the case that it's even more important. This is a project of ours that I didn't have anything to do with, but I'm very proud of it and our team for having come up with this. This is a linear accelerator room that is typically surrounded by 3-foot thick concrete walls because of the radiation absorption that needs to happen. And so our design team challenged itself, is there a way to still provide a view in a space like this? If we could provide a view, would it have a fundamental benefit to the people who work and use that space? Because we all know that in a space like this, there can be very high levels of stress. Just the use of the machine itself, the isolation, but whatever medical condition a patient might be in are inherently stressful. So our designers were clever and invented a way to put part of that 3-foot concrete wall behind the stone wall that you're seeing behind the glass behind the plants. And the anecdotal evidence we have from those who use this space is that it's transformative. Is that by going into a space where you don't expect there to be any view, to have a view profoundly changes the experience. So this is an extreme example of how view makes a difference. Spectrum is another really big issue, of course, and all of us, I'm sure, are familiar with spectrum. We talk about it a lot relative to LED lighting. And so just going to pause on this slide for a moment. So if we think about the typical light spectrum as it reaches the surface of the Earth, oh, I'm getting some beeping. Okay, there it goes. So if we think about that typical light spectrum as it reaches the surface of the Earth, what has only been learned in the last less than 20 years is that our eyes have in them receptors that we are not aware of their function, but they are constantly scanning for this blue wavelength of light. And that's shown by this dashed line that we've labeled circadian light sensitivity. And what's happening inside our brains and bodies is that that blue light is being used to control our hormonal responses and hormone levels. Basically, our sleep and wakefulness cycle is determined by the blue light that we receive. And so previous forms of electric light were unfortunately almost completely lacking in that type of wavelength. Now, if we look at a typical LED light today, what's interesting about LED light, it has a pretty nice even distribution, gives us good good color rendering qualities. And it has this one strange spike that comes very near to our circadian light sensitivity. So when we're using LED light, there's potential for good and for bad. We have to use it more carefully than we use previous forms of electric lighting. The spike in that graph that you see is the reason why health officials warn us not to be using our technology too late into the evening, because that LED light spike can disrupt our sleep cycle if we use it too late. So we still maintain with our clients that there are strong benefits to the spectrum that comes from natural daylight, even compared to high quality LED light. And that's yet another reason we still hope to introduce daylight into most of our spaces. So next slide.
Perfect.
Oh, here's a poll question. All right, this is a really important question. I'm eager to see the results of this one.
So we want to give you guys a break, and so that you can answer this quick question. And if you're sleeping, you will wake up. If you're eating lunch, you can pay attention. Just kidding. So we have about 66% voted. This went much faster. 73, 76, 80%. Okay. We'll close the vote now. And polling. Share results. Let me know if you can see the results, Paul.
Yes, I can see them. They're coming up.
Okay. So it's a code that says 20%, energy efficiency 36%, and visual comfort 44%.
All right.
It's interesting.
That's very helpful. I really like seeing that poll. So let's go ahead and move on, and let's go to the next slide. All right. So we are designing very differently our daylighting applications today than we were a mere 5 years ago. And one of the things that's happened is that even as we're thinking differently about designing for daylight, the building and energy codes have come out with very stringent criteria for where and when and how to implement daylighting, and specifically how to control all of that. And we find that with our clients and even with our consulting engineering firms, there is frankly a lot of confusion and lack of understanding about how to do a good job with the controls and the daylighting. So I just want to refresh your memory. So this is that building from only 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were still focused on equity of daylight, on delivering as much light to ground floor as to top floors. We were doing things such as you see in this diagram, where we took a tubular daylight device, made it 25 feet long from roof to a ground floor with two 90-degree bends. And actually, we delivered pretty nice daylight doing these kind of things. But with today's perspective, I look at this and say, that's unnecessary. That's probably a greater expense and more effort than is justified by the results that we're getting, either from the human performance side or from the energy saving side. So the next slide, Secrete, shows a couple more examples. These for us were fairly typical design solutions, again, within the last 10 years, where we had things like translucent sunshades or other fixed blade louver sunshades. And if you think back to Secrete's analysis of the payback analysis on fixed sunshades, it's pretty dreary. There's no payback whatsoever. These things will need to be replaced or maintained before they pay themselves off. So let's look at the next slide. So I wanted to share with you a more recent example of how our thinking has changed. This is a floor plan daylighting analysis of a school that we'll be showing you. In fact, you've seen an image of this school already. I should mention, by the way, we're using a lot of schools to illustrate this presentation, but what we're talking about would apply to any commercial building, to a healthcare setting, to an office setting, just not probably residential. We have a wealth of data on schools and a 40-year track record of data that we can share with you. So that's why we're using schools just for purposes of illustration in this presentation. So here's a relatively recent school designed on 21st century learning principles with learning communities, but that's not the real point. If I look at a typical classroom, you're seeing here that I'm highlighting, only about half of it is in the defined daylighting zone. The other half is not in the daylighting zone. And the point I want to make is that if I am sitting in the non-daylighted zone portion of that classroom, I still have an excellent view out. I still have the benefit of that spectrum of daylight coming into this space. And that's what's important to us. And one of the thing that we wanted to share is that we use this as an example, this building, as a way to think more creatively about the building code and what it's requiring with control. So Sucrit, could you advance to the next slide, please? So I think we have a picture of the interior. Okay, so what I want to point out, we have pretty generous window areas here. And we, though, in this building, consciously broke up the window areas with continuous sections of wall. And where we have those continuous sections of wall, they're just slightly more than 4 feet. By making those more than 4 feet, we have separate daylighting zones related to each window, as opposed to a continuous merged daylighting zone. What that means is each daylighting zone now has fewer than 150 watts of electrical power energy in it. That lets us obviate the need for the daylighting controls. Back up again, one slide, Sucrit. All the portions of the building that show daylighting zones in that light tan color, none of those need active daylighting controls. That's the photo sensor and all the other complications that go with it. On a building like this, that's a savings of tens of thousands of dollars and a reduction in complexity that our client actually finds very appealing, because daylighting controls are notorious for going both out of calibration and for occupants finding ways to defeat them over time. And so we were able to take those tens of thousands of dollars savings and put it into other sustainable and energy conserving measures in this same building. And that was a fundamental insight that we wanted to share. We've actually had to educate our engineering consultants to understand how to work with the code to not inadvertently create problems for ourselves and problems for our clients. So now there are a couple spaces that are bigger, like the gymnasium, like this commons, where we do have daylighting zones that get big, and we use daylighting controls in those cases, and we use them as smartly as we can. So we're not saying there's no place for daylighting controls. We're just saying be intelligent about it, and let's avoid unnecessary complication and more control points in our buildings than are really helping our clients.
Paul, are you sure that our energy use did not go up because of all of this?
That's an excellent question. I am so glad you asked me that, Sucrit. So, of course, there's an answer for that. The building we're just sharing with you was part of a bond issue that had 4 brand new buildings, all on the same schedule, all with similar design construction team capability, all with similar budgets for construction per square foot. Sorry about that. I should have turned that off. And here are the results. Oh, and I should have said, and all 4 buildings had an energy use intensity target of 25 kBTUs a square foot a year. That was a district target that they gave us. Here are the operating results from the last 3 years from those 4 buildings. The 3 buildings in blue are the other buildings that we did not work on, Sucrit and I and the rest of our team. The building in yellow is performing right at 30 kBTUs per square foot per year. Remember, we modeled it at 28. The district target was 25. It is the only one of the 4 new buildings that is anywhere close to meeting its target. And again, it's doing it in real time, in real life conditions. And this building, compared to its new competitors, saves the district $600,000 over the first 20 years of its life. So actually, we're using this building to make the point that needless complication in daylighting and daylighting controls is not necessary to achieve high levels of energy performance. In fact, sometimes it may be the opposite, because you're going to take dollars away from other potential strategies that may have a better return on investment. So I think, do we have one more slide, Sucrit? No, I think that was our conclusion. So we've gotten through our content. I think we are right on time, within a minute. And so at this point, we're ready to respond to any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul and Sucrit. That was a great presentation. I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions by typing them into the chat window. I have changed the settings so that people can unmute themselves. So if you want to go on camera and ask your question out loud, also just type into the chat window, say, I have a question, and I will call on you. While I'm giving people a chance to formulate their questions, I want to ask one of my own. Sucrete, you showed this case study looking at a number of sort of shoebox buildings, so irregular shape. How much does shape matter? We know that shape can have a big effect on the spatial daylight autonomy of a space. So do we see any inversions or any changes in the effectiveness of daylight versus LED lighting based on geometry?
I think that's a very good question, Nathan. And I think we tried to keep it to a point that it is a good usable space, whether it's a classroom or a good decent sized office type scenario to be able to work with it. So that's where it was coming from. But having said that, if you really think about it as a modular scenario, it would be similar. And then again, if we have to add another complexity to it, you can even say, oh, well, what if the orientation changes from south to something else? What does that mean to, yes, would it be adding more glare to it or not? So there are a lot of different nuances to this. You're very correct, Nathan. But we wanted to keep it, well, if it's just south, which is the best orientation we can get, a good size space, which would be a typical classroom or a good decent sized office scenario, what does that really lead to in all of this analysis? But in general, the trend, I would assume, would still be the same. Just keeping in mind that our lighting power density has dropped so much from that perspective. And if we are not seeing that inversion in the south side, it would be very difficult to see in any other sides, or even in the others, if we keep the same window to wall ratio on the other bigger models.
Yeah, another way to think about that question, Nathaniel, I'm glad you raised it, is this. I have seen through the years architects shape buildings, that is, design buildings with a higher ratio of surface area to floor area, specifically and in order to enhance more view and daylighting. So one of the things that this modeling is telling me is we can afford to compact buildings a little bit and still have good results, both in terms of daylighting and in terms of energy efficiency. So it started to change how I'm thinking about how extended a building form we want to create. We still like a building form that is overall a little more slender and elongated in the east-west axis, but some of the extremes we've seen buildings go to just for the purposes of daylight, we might start to pull back from that. So I think this is starting to tell us a little bit about the shape of our buildings.
All right, thank you. I see a two-part question from Liam. Liam, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Liam, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can.
Great. Thanks, guys. Great presentation. Yeah, two-part question about the SDA analysis. First question is, in that box model calculation, what percentage frame did you use on the fenestrations? And the second question is, what visible light transmittance are you using for the fenestration with blinds down, rather than just a normal VLT considering blinds up?
So in this side, thanks for that question, Liam. We did not consider blinds down, considering we were doing just the spatial daylight autonomy side of it, and we didn't really address ASE aspect of it. We were assuming all the blinds were up, and this is an overall well-illuminated space at that point. And your first question was?
Percentage frame?
That was a traditional percentage frame. We addressed it based on the code minimum U values, or high performance, slightly better than code from that perspective.
Yeah, the blinds down is really an interesting conversation to have, because as we do daylighting design, we tend to do the analysis ignoring blinds or window coverings. And in reality, those are so necessary for occupants to control glare and make those spaces habitable for themselves. So we actually talk a lot about the issue of how to model blinds down, whether to model blinds down, and what kind of window coverings are really going to provide the best performance. I see, Sucrete, you're sharing now what the model inputs and assumptions were in the slide, correct?
Yeah.
Well, Paul, that brings up something that I was interested in. What about glare? It seems like there's a big difference between providing something that's mainly horizontal illuminance and providing a light source that can sometimes be largely vertical illuminance.
I think Secrete wants to answer that.
Sorry, can you ask that again, Nathan?
What about glare?
Yeah, so glare is another good thing, right? So that's why when we were working with this and when we said that it is a good daylight design to have a translucent clerestory, we actually meant it because that's when you can actually have reduced glare. And then once we are looking at just the view aspect out of it, we would not be, would not have the blinds open if in case it is a glary condition. Having said that, if the blinds are down, it reduces my my daylight autonomy. They're not directly daylight autonomy, but overall well daylit space within the aspect, which is inherently also saying I don't have another daylight savings from that point. We were looking at it from a juxtaposition of, well, if it's a best case scenario, my blinds are never down. I always have a good amount of light coming in. And again, the crux of the study was focusing on, well, if we have that, that's a scenario, and that's the best scenario for an energy efficiency perspective from daylighting savings that we can get. Do we still make the cut? And we didn't from that perspective. But if we do bring in the question of glare in it, that would inherently make it even a better case from that side of saying that it doesn't make sense to do those controls because we even have those shades down. But having said all of that, we should focus on glare reduction the way we can on all of our orientation, depending upon what that is.
And I would say the concern for glare is one of the reasons we still do a fair amount of top lighting. Just as you suggest, Nathaniel, by using top lighting, we help reduce the glare quite a bit. We use a lot of tubular daylighting devices, but other things like translucent clerestories and gems and things to help with that concern over glare. But I wanted to broaden it a little bit too and share that for Secrete and myself, it's a constant conversation with our building designers over glazing specification, because designers seem to want glass that's as bright and light transmitting as possible. And we are always pushing back on that, trying to get the glass to be less glary. So that's a constant, push and pull.
Right. Thank you. I see we have a question coming in from Anna. Anna, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to see if Paul, you could go over again how you were unable to use daylight sensors, or how you were able to not install daylight sensors in that example you showed. I didn't quite understand sort of the approach you were suggesting to use.
Yeah, it's a good question. If you, excuse me, if you dig into the code, what you find is that Secrete, why don't you take this from me? I'm going to have a little more water, right? Because I know you got this one too.
So the approach there was, Anna, that we looked at, okay, well, what does the code actually ask us? And this was more in the schematic design and DD design aspect of it. We were looking at, well, all of these spaces would have to be controlled through daylight controls based on how the IECC code is written right now. And talking to the owner, talking to our internal team, we wanted to get out of the fact, and we wanted just to be, level down, manual if needed controls for those things rather than daylit controls to be able to do those sites. And once we looked at the whole sketch, we realized that all of this will have to be separated. At least part of that zone would have to be controlled separately than the rest of the classroom. And it doesn't give us an option to just control the whole things as one and manually dimming from that perspective. So once we realized that, we actually changed how that daylit zone was being discussed. And we said, well, we just have to break it down to a point that none of that daylit zone is more than 150 watts. And we did that by bifurcating our glazing in a particular, the dimensions of that glazing to be, first of all, more than 4 feet here, and then whatever that space was left. So we were designing it from that perspective, that we can actually break those zones out, and we don't have to. So in this case, none of this was ever, they don't have any daylighting controls. even though the code would technically require it, if we wouldn't have placed the glazing the way it was supposed to be.
Right. So the code makes it clear the daylighting zone extends 2 feet past the jamb, left and right, either side of the aperture. So by having a 4 foot or 4 foot 1 inch piece of solid wall between jambs, that actually separates the daylighting zones. And because LED is so efficient, what we found is that almost always we're under 150 watts of electric lighting in that zone. So just how you creatively think about the window patterning on the outside of the building enabled us to do this simplified control strategy.
So can you just quickly confirm though that there'd be lights on in that zone while it's being daylit? Is that what you're suggesting?
There would be at
Okay.
the option of the teacher. So the teacher has a slide dimmer for the daylight zone and the non-daylight zone, although not required by code. Just we wanted to give that option. And so in this building, we're dependent on occupant training and responsiveness to do that. I'll call it daylight harvesting, but really the big point, remember, when you've only got 0.4 of a watt to displace, there's so few watts that you can harvest, it's just not a big deal. We're just not seeing it play out in terms of the actual energy performance of the building, especially when you compare to the cost of the controls.
I'd like to follow up on that question a little. You mentioned the 2 foot reach beyond the edge of the glazing. Does that, in your experience, line up with the occupant perception of daylight, or do you think that's more a way of playing with the code to try to get your scheme to fit the rules?
Great, yeah. That was something I worried about quite a bit because this was the first building where we did this. Since then, we have done this strategy on another half a dozen buildings. And I was a little bit worried about that 4 foot gap in the daylighting aperture. But in experience, I've actually found that it does not create any kind of bothersome interruption of daylighting in view. I found that our clients and occupants just accept that as a normal feature. And in fact, over time, I find that all kinds of things they find ways to use that nice extra piece of solid wall. Surprisingly, it has not turned into an issue in terms of the quality of the daylight for us.
All right. I see we have another question coming. This is from Stephen. Stephen, would you like to unmute yourself and speak to Paul and Sucreet?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, a question. So there's been great progress in LEDs, as you mentioned, in terms of efficacy. But you had a chart that showed LEDs versus daylight. You showed daylight as 110 to 130 lumens per watt, I think, which is what it is outside. But of course, there's been great progress in glazing as well. And if you send that daylight through spectrally selective glass, you're up in the 200 lumen per watt range also. So just sort of wanted to flag the fact that if you're choosing the right glass, at least the cooling load impacts trading lumen for lumen are probably about in the same range.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, don't disagree with that in any way.
And I guess one of the comment that carries on to the last comment about the controls. Historically, I agree with you that dimming fluorescence and all the hardware wiring up sensors, it was a giant pain in the neck and costly. But one of the things that has come along almost as a package with LEDs are dimming controls, which you may want for tuning light levels independent of daylight, and then things like wireless sensors. So what we've seen is, although the benefits, the energy benefits, I agree with you, are lower than they have been in the past, the ease of making it work is actually, and the cost is actually the cost is lower and the ease is greater. So we've seen more success now, although you're saving smaller amounts of energy, just because the technology has evolved some as well. I don't know if you want to comment on that as well in terms of how the LEDs are progressing.
Yeah, it's a great observation that LED has also enabled more effective control strategies and removed some of the nightmares that went along with trying to dim or otherwise control fluorescent lighting. We find that those control points, though, still bring some added complexity. And we find that occupants of our buildings, teachers or office workers, are a little bit confused by that and not always buying into wanting to cooperate with those controls. So we find there's still some frustration with lots of controls in buildings, and our goal is to, in general, simplify. So that's why we've taken this approach. But I agree with the larger point. LED has made it easier to do this than previously.
All right. Well, I see that we've come to the end of our hour. I want to thank Paul and Sucrit for this very interesting presentation. And thanks to everyone for joining this IBPSA-USA Research Committee webinar. Please join us again on December 3rd at noon Pacific time, when Ben Pauly, Rawad El-Kantar, and Chris Mackey will present UrbanOpt, an open source software development kit for community and urban district energy modeling. Thanks again to everyone. Have a great day.